All right. I think we're ready.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Nick.
I'm Jill.
And we're HipStrings. So today we are sitting down. I've got to hunch over a little bit because I'm a little bit taller torso-wise than Jill. And because we're sitting down, you have the honor of me actually wearing pants this time. So why are we sitting with a wheel? Why are we spinning here?
Tonight is, it's time to have your fluff ready. And to start talking about how you spin consistently over a large project.
All right.
So I've already spun up one bobbin of my bats.
So if all of you remember how that looked beforehand, it was definitely not this bright royal purple.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, show what it's coming up from the carded bat, right?
Yeah, this is the carded bats. I showed them on Instagram. So this is a different color. I still have a little bit more bats to add. I figure I'll card them and throw them in the pile. Because the pile is big. So, but I wanted to go over kind of how you spin for consistency. And a lot of this is by addressing two things: wraps per inch and angle of twist. So a wraps per inch makes sure that your drafting is consistent, and angle of twist means that your twist is consistent.
Okay.
So you need to have both of those going on.
So when you say, we'll take this one piece at a time, right? When you say your drafting is consistent, what does that mean both for what you're doing and for the final product, right?
It means that when I'm spinning, no matter how I'm spinning, if I'm doing long draw, I'm doing long draw all the time. If I'm doing kind of some semi-woolen, I'm doing it all the time.
And that's going to impact your wraps per inch, right?
And that I'm drafting out the same amount.
Now, last time, you mentioned not only wraps per inch and angle of twist, but you also mentioned grist, right? So
grist isn't something you can really track while you're spinning.
Right.
But if your drafting method is consistent, your wraps per inch is consistent, your angle of twist is consistent, then your grist is going to be consistent.
There you go. Okay. Good. So, where are we going to start?
So we're going to start by talking about wraps per inch, because I think that's what people are most familiar with, and it's what you start off with dealing with singles. So wraps per inch is, very simply put, the kind of the diameter of your spinning.
Yeah, and it comes from the term, quite literally, how many wraps does it take to create 1 inch?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna undo one of the future demonstration pieces for a second here. So what the
remember, that's a 2 inch.
Yes, I remember. It's because there's a 2 there. So here's one of our wraps per inch tools. I'm going to show the back side so you don't get distracted, because ideally what you do is you wrap the yarn or the single over this period and blah 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 blah. You keep going, and you don't stretch it. You just lay it on there essentially as you're wrapping, and then it has to be right up against each other, and you count how many wraps there are in this case 2 inches, divide by 2, or if you had a wraps per inch tool that was half as big, you'd wrap it in for 1 inch and then count how many those are. When you're measuring like a bulky yarn, it's pretty easy, right? You're only going to get 10 or less, right? So
yeah, much less.
So for bulky, sorry, I was pulling a number out of thin air. Anyways, but when you're doing a single, that's pretty thin. I wouldn't want to wrap this around to
take the time to wrap this carefully, however many times.
So there is this is not something we invented, but we produced this, and there's some other ones out there. The marker lines for a wraps per inch tool. And what you can see here is, in this particular one that we've designed, you have different lines that correlate to different number of wraps per inch. So you can see here at the bottom, if your yarn fits into this notch, or your single, I should say, fits into this notch, and is not going over the edge, then you have about a 40 wraps per inch. But If you have to go up a little bit, you have like 36, 32, etc., etc. For those of you that are working on different types of projects, we actually have ones that go even thinner, and we have ones that go even thicker. So this is our standard reps per inch tool.
Mm-hmm.
There's a micro, which is for even thinner, and there's a macro, which is for even thicker. But bottom line is, each one of these lines correlates to a certain number of reps per inch. All right, so now that we've given the baseline of what this tool is, how do you use it?
Okay, so when I'm tracking reps per inch, all you need to do is you stop, you pull some single off the bobbin.
Not off, you don't have to break it.
You don't have to break it.
Pull it back out, right?
Pull it back off. Pinch or twist so you're not getting twist in your fiber supply. And then I'm just laying this
Do a little higher if you can.
like that and trying to find out where it matches. This is kind of hard for me. But this is about a 20 reps per inch single.
Okay.
So I can check that.
So, since I know where you need to go, I'm gonna feed you.
Okay.
Here. But this isn't the first bobbin you've spun, Jill. How do I know that I'm going to keep track of that? I mean,
So
how can I go back and
when
make
I was
reference?
first spinning, once I got it to the thickness that I wanted, I kept on checking it, so I got settled on my thickness. I pulled off and broke a length and put it on a card.
And taped it on the back.
Taped it on the back, so it won't go anywhere. And then use that to measure my reps per inch, and that should be about a 20 rep per inch single.
Okay, so
Between 20 and 22.
Go in here, and I'm gonna lay it on the 20. I look at that, and then I look at the 22. No, it's going over the 22. And if I go look at the 18, now I can see some. It might be 18.
Yeah.
Between 18 and 20, I would argue, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's in that range. You don't have to be precise.
Just so
this
you
is
can
woolen spun, so you don't need
see
to be
what
as
it looks
precise
like
with
lining up on
woolen
there.
spun. Woolen spun is harder to predict, though. But now I have my sample. I can check back to it. And then what I do is I check once I know I'm in the groove. I've had the same measurement a couple times in a row. Then I will just check my reps per inch every time I sit down to spin, and anytime I make any adjustments to my wheel. Because when you make adjustments to your wheel, it's usually changing the mechanics of your wheel and changing how much twist is going in, and we tend to naturally respond to changes in twist by our wheel with changing how thick or thin we're drafting. And so your reps per inch sometimes changes. This is really, it's very strong in flyer-led wheels. A lot of people, flyer-led, also known as Scotch tension, you find that you spin thinner at the end of a bobbin, and that's because your wheel is a lot more efficient at putting twist in at the end of a bobbin rather than beginning of a bobbin.
Okay, so we're barreling through.
Yeah.
But let's pause for a second. I've got some questions, but first, Kathleen says hi. Hi, Kathleen. And second, Hollis asks, what type of spinning wheel is Jill using?
I am using my Shacked flat iron. It's one of my favorite wheels for spinning singles, especially large projects, because I have a woolly winder for this and I don't have a Magicraft woolly winder yet. So I almost always spin in double drive for singles because it's a more consistent drive system.
Okay, you're getting too far into that other stuff. I've got other things to ask you about first. But one thing I will note that I always like pointing out about this wheel, this was neat because I don't know if you've ever looked at sectioning wheels. There are left-handed ones and there are right-handed ones, and it can be tricky to find the correct direction. If I remember correctly, you actually like to spin opposite side from what most people do, right?
Yes.
So is this considered right-handed, or is this considered left-handed?
This is left-handed. Fibers on the left.
Okay, so
flyer on the right.
Anyway, the neat thing about this wheel is that when you buy it, it comes disassembled, and you can construct it either left-handed or right-handed for what you like.
Yeah, flyer on the right, flyer on the left.
And so the nice thing is that, especially if you don't know which you like better, you can put it together, try it out one side,
Well,
take it apart, try
generally,
it out the
it's
other way.
whatever hand is closest to your orifice when you spin. That's the side you want your flyer on.
Okay.
So I spin with my right hand forward. And so my flyer is on the right.
Okay. So
if I spun the other way, I would want the flyer on the left.
All right. So then we're getting back to the measuring.
Yeah.
When do you measure the reps range?
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said in your article, which maybe do you want to mention your article at this point?
Well, it's coming out like this fall.
Oh,
so.
okay. Never mind. I don't know the future. All right. So let me just put it this way then. Key things are when you're first sitting down, spin a little bit, check
So
it.
you get what you want.
When you are making any significant changes, right? So if you are changing your hook, if you are changing your tension, if you got up to, make some food and then came back, if your child let you know that they forgot to submit their homework remote and suddenly you're all stressed out and that changes how you're spinning, you want to check then as well.
Yeah.
Right? That's an oddly specific example, right? No. So Angela has a question. My wheel can spin either Scotch or double drive. Which is better for more consistent spinning?
So double drive is a more consistent system because how much twist your wheel is putting in changes as your bobbin fills. That is most pronounced on a flyer lead, also known as Scotch, because your wheel gets a lot more efficient at winding on. With double drive, since you have a figure-8 drive band that has slippage, the slippage helps regulate the difference between the twist that's going into your single and how it's winding on. So the amount of twist you're putting in is more consistent over the course of the entire bobbin compared to a flyer lead system.
So from the flyer lead, just to elaborate on that a little bit more, the reason why it becomes more efficient is because your core is getting bigger and bigger. And if you think about the angular twist, the core is going to be able to spin fewer times
to wrap
wrap more on there, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like changing gears in a car, right? Or on a bike or anything like that. The smaller gear, you have to put a lot of force in order to make it move a lot, but the larger gear, you have to put not so much force to make it move that same amount, right? So who would have thought all this is so complicated, right? Bottom line is, you will be making more adjustments in your speed and your tension if you're using flyer lead than if you use double drive.
Right. But double drive does not have as much control over take-up. Take-up is more to do with the actual, physics of the shape of the whorls in your bobbin versus your wool pulley. Mm-hmm. And so you can't adjust it as much as you can a flyer lead wheel.
Yeah. So
I usually spin singles in double drive and then I ply in flyer lead or bobbin lead.
But what I think I'll emphasize what you said there. So Angela's asking for a suggestion. I think if your spinning style with your wheel is compatible with double drive, definitely go with that. But if you find that you have trouble with the take-up for what you are spinning, then go to flyer lead because you're going to have a very limited amount of way of adjusting that take-up in the double drive. It's going to be more, this is what your wheel does, and if your fiber that you're working with doesn't match with that, if it doesn't jive with it, then you're going to have a bad time. So it's all about this first little part, like this little bit. Experimenting, getting it set to move forward. So and Angela makes the comment, it is so confusing. I learned to spin on a spindle, and when I got a wheel, I just figured it out. Well, kudos to you for being able to figure it out in the first place, right? A lot of people, even when they get lessons, it's still tricky. I'm still figuring it out, right? All right.
Okay. So that's spinning a consistent single. Now, what about, is it actually going to be a yarn that you want to work with?
Yeah, so single's just one part of it, right?
Right. So what you can do, another part, is you will pull off a length again, and then you do what's called a ply back sample. So holding off the twist, for a 2-ply, you just fold it against itself, and you can help it along its way, but it's going to pigtail. Okay. This is a little bit light twist because I am spinning for a 3-ply, and I can tell that's a little bit light because at the very end where it folds, that loop is
I'm gonna see if I can use
almost open.
technology here.
Okay.
Right. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. I don't know if that's
and
gonna
it's totally
focus.
not focusing on you. Let's make. Oh gosh. Okay. Almost. There we go.
There. Okay. So if that loop was open, you would have the right amount of twist for singles yarn.
What do you mean by the loop being open? Like it looks like an open
loop, yeah.
An open circle.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And the bigger that loop is, the less twist you have in your single.
Okay. So that's a plyback sample
For
for a 2-ply. How do you do 3-ply?
So for a 2-ply, you do kind of like a crochet chain. It's a little bit more difficult. So I just did some finger gymnastics.
All right. So let's let it do its thing so we can show the final result.
There.
Okay. So lift that up a little bit, and I
gotta unwind from the lava.
And I'll zoom in again some. That's focusing better.
So it's kind of like making a slip knot and then folding it back against itself.
So what I'm going to do, I apologize in advance if I make you all dizzy.
I have a sample. No, leave it there.
Leave
I
it there?
have a sample that's 3-ply.
Well, but I wanted people to see how you do your gymnastics.
No, that is not useful.
Let me see if I can use the magic of words to describe what you did, right? So, okay, wait, slow down, right? So, she's folding it over once, right? And then wrapping it back around her finger. Yeah, it really would be useful to show it.
Yeah, but...
Okay, but yes, all right, fine. So, the easier thing when you're starting
is to
break off and do a plyback sample. This is Jill's 3-ply plyback sample, as you sort of saw beforehand. Yeah.
You can measure the rasp
and
French
you
on
can measure
that.
the rasp French on that.
Which I think I was getting about 8 or 9.
Yeah, no, I would say 8 or 9 is a perfect description of that, right? So, I'm going to hold my hand there weirdly, right?
And with some extra poof, because this is woolen, I expect it to be a little bit fatter than that. So we're probably talking about a yarn that's probably a nice worsted weight, a solid worsted weight yarn.
Can you do a mini chain ply? Is what
yes, that's what
Angela's
I'm doing.
Asking. Yes. Okay. So yeah, I was trying to make a really bad description of exactly that. Where I tend to have this habit of using way too many words to describe something that somebody else can do very quickly. So yes, a mini chain ply. We might have to do a short little video at a different angle. Maybe at the end of the podcast we can show that off. And just to share the advice, Kathleen has suggested that she finds double drive easier to make teeny minor adjustments.
Yes,
and that makes sense,
true.
right? Because if you have something that a large knob is not going to have a lot of effect on it, then yeah, you're going to be able to have the resolution to do tiny adjustments. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, all right, that tells you how not only the size of the single,
yes,
but also what the final yarn you're going to get is. But, should I segue you, or do you have?
No, I have things I need to say.
Okay, say.
Okay, so a lot of times people want to work backwards and have like a goal yarn in mind, and so you kind of have that corresponds to a wraps per inch, and this is where it gets tricky. Okay, this is not a guaranteed system. Your yarn is going to bloom when you finish it, when you wash it. How much it blooms is entirely dependent on how you spin, how much twist is in it, what the fiber is, what the ply structure is. There's a lot of variables going on there. But if you have experience, you can kind of tell this fiber poofs up this much for me. This fiber poofs up this much for me. It's usually in the range of anywhere from 5% to like 20 or 25%.
That's a pretty big range.
Yeah, it's a pretty big range. I usually guess I spin with fluffier wools. And so I usually plan on, I need to spin a weight below what I'm aiming for. So if I want a DK weight yarn, I need to aim for something that on the, freshly spun is sport weight. And then when I wash it, it's going to bulk up to DK.
So there's another part to that as well, which gets to what Summerhill Spinner is talking about. She asks, so you started with a 22 wraps per inch single to get a worsted 3-ply. Mm-hmm. And yes, that doesn't ish, right? Yes, ish, right? So
the typical shortcut is that you take your wraps per inch of your single, you multiply it by 1.5, and that gives you just wait. Sorry. Because you have to get fatter.
So you've got the
Divide.
fluff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you start off with, okay, I want to spin X end fiber.
Yes.
And yarn, right?
Mm-hmm.
At, we said 8 wraps per inch. Let's say that's our goal.
Right.
First, you need to account for the fluff that's going to happen when you wash it.
Yeah.
Then you need to account for how the singles
structure
nestle together.
So I always know for 3-ply. 3-ply is you take your goal wraps per inch and you multiply it by 2 to get the wraps per inch of your singles. So, and I'm going to show you that already I was spinning about 20 wraps per inch singles. That should bring me to a 10 wraps per inch plied yarn, 3-ply, and I'm getting something that's fatter than that.
Right.
Because it's woolen spun. The amount of twist I have in it, and other factors. So for 2-ply, if I spin 20 wraps per inch singles, I should expect to get about a 15 wraps per inch yarn when I 2-ply it.
And I'm going to alleviate some of your memory issues. I'm going to go look up what you wrote previously on
thank
this.
you.
If I can figure out where you saved it.
But if you have your final wraps per inch, you multiply by 1.5.
Where am I looking? You know,
I don't know.
Okay.
You look for ply basics.
Okay. You keep talking. I'll look at this.
So there are some guidelines, but my experience shows that they're not super reliable. It is much better to do a plyback sample and measure your plyback sample. And if you're really wanting to be sure about things, take that ply sample and get it wet, and then let it dry. And then you can see whether or not you need to be spinning your singles thinner or fatter to get your goal yarn.
Is this the right version?
Possibly. It should have the calculations in there.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm highlighting here for you. Yeah, I'm sure this is super entertaining for everybody online right now.
So, let's go. Okay.
I'm just worried that this is the one that I messed up.
No, that's just a 3-ply example. 2-ply is always the one that's confusing to me because I never do 2-plies.
The same for 2-ply?
Yeah. 2-ply single should be approximately 1.5 times the wraps per inch of the final yarn.
Yeah. And maybe what we should do is put in the notes of the podcast the exact equation, because I know it can, especially as we're flubbing over it, it can be tricky to get it.
It's really
from
useful
us, right?
to have examples.
Yeah. So
how to do the math.
But the the bottom line that I think we want to note is that it's not a simple addition because of the fact that you've got the fluff, because of the fact that you've got the nestling. If I'm just from very simple, from taking the
woolen
2-ply,
draft is going to fluff up more in plying than a worsted.
But it depends on your fiber, and it's not just simply, okay, I'm doing a 2-ply, so I take my wraps print for one and my wraps print for other and put it together. No, because there is that
how much
that
they twist, and so
together.
angle of twist will also affect.
Is that the segue?
The relationship, yeah, that's the segue.
Okay, that's
so now,
the segue.
This is why we're going to talk about angle of twist. So angle of twist is really hard to determine on a single, okay? Because you need to be tracking individual fibers and what angle they're going.
You need like a microscope.
Yeah. However, you can easily track it by doing plyback samples. Yeah. And if you're tracking angle of twist, you don't necessarily need to do a complicated, 3-ply plyback sample. You can take your 3-ply sample, check it for the angle of twist that you want. Because angle of twist is going to differ depending on what you're planning on using the yarn for.
Okay. And I think that's going to address a question that Angela has.
And then you can take that same single and do a 2-ply and track, what the angle of twist is on that 2-ply, and you can track that for the rest of your spin.
Okay. So
even if you're not planning on making a 3-ply.
Let's even if you are planning on making a 3-ply.
Even if you are planning on making a 3-ply.
Okay. So let's simplify this a little bit again. So if we go back and we say your angle of twist is going to be different in a 2-ply or a 3-ply.
Yes.
But if you want a 3-ply, instead of having to do all of the finger gymnastics in order to get your angle of twist for the final product, each time you're measuring, first, you get everything how you want, do your gymnastics, measure the angle of twist. Second, once you have that angle of twist measured in the 3-ply and you've got everything just right, measure it again in the simple plyback version, like what Jill's doing right now, where it's just falling back on itself. Okay, cool. Now you're going to have the comparison, right? So we mentioned the plyback sample that Jill made, or not the plyback, I guess this is still called, yes, okay, sorry. The plyback sample from the 3-ply. Now Jill is making a plyback sample from the 2-ply. And we're going to see that the angle of twist is different as she measures.
Hopefully.
And we'll talk to you about how to measure.
Yeah.
So the angle of twist is different on the 2-ply versus 3-ply with the same single. So now, just because it's easier to track it 2-ply version, even though she's got the end goal of the 3-ply, she's measuring the 2-ply as she's going along. Right?
Yeah. I want to see how consistent I've been.
So, but now you're comparing the 2-ply to 3-ply, right? So what did you get for the 2-ply?
For the 2-ply, this is about a 30-degree angle.
Okay.
And I'm still getting about a 30-degree, which means I'm putting more twist in right now, and I can tell with my spinning that I'm actually putting too much twist in.
Okay.
For my singles.
So what would you expect the 2-ply of that one to have been?
Probably closer to 25 or 20.
Okay.
Which would be less twist.
This is perfect, and I can completely expect that if you are trying to demonstrate things while you're spinning.
Yeah, I'm a little stressed.
Yeah, you're going to spin a little bit weirdly. Okay, so I do want to bring that back to Angela's question. She has an issue where when she plies, the finished yarn is stiffer than what she was hoping. Is that because of how I spin the single or how I ply? And is that related to angle of twist?
Yes, it is. So when you do a plyback sample, that's going to show you what the balanced twist should be. So if you then ply your yarn, your singles, the same way that you do your plyback sample, with the same angle of twist, you will have a balanced yarn. That means that, you know, the twist is it's counteracting,
compensates for itself.
Compensates for itself.
So the single wants to spin one way,
and your
then
yarn will
putting
hang
that with
straight.
another one.
Like so many spinners, that goal of your skein hanging straight.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the mechanic for a second first, right? So one single, it's twisted one way, right? The other single, it's twisted the same way, but when you put it on top of it the other direction, they nestle to each other. They release that twist, and that's why they spin on top of each other. So if you put too much or too little twist into plying it, you're going to result in either a too loose yarn that kinks up, or a too tight yarn, which is, as you say, going to be stiffer than what you were hoping.
Right.
Right.
I think it's really hard to put so much twist into your singles that the natural plyback is going to be firm, because that's almost going to be a yarn that is pigtailing onto your bobbin.
So that is another point. So if you are really putting a lot of twist before it goes onto the bobbin, and you're getting these pigtails showing up on your bobbin, that is an indication then that your single may be at fault for making this too stiff. But if you've got the situation where your single is not twisting up all that much, and it's not
your plyback
pigtails,
sample when you're doing your singles isn't too tight, then the problem is you're putting too much twist in your plying.
Yeah. Okay, so Summerhill Spinner has the perfect statement of sample, and more sample. And that was in reference to when we were saying, how do you do all these calculations and go back and forth and et cetera, et cetera. The sampling goes back also to the point of you can't just sample for the plyback sample. You also need to do things like make it wet so that it can fluff up and all that jazz. Mm-hmm. Angela has the question of, so what should be a goal angle of twist?
So that depends on what you're going to use the yarn for. So for hardest amount of twist means that your yarn is very tightly nestled together. It'll be very strong. It'll be very dense. That's a really good yarn for a warp, for weaving.
Socks.
Something that you don't want to wear. But if you're trying to make a garment that you want to have some knit, some drape, some flexibility that doesn't feel like rope, then you're talking more in the neighborhood of about usually the range of 30 degrees to 20 degrees for knitting. Most knitting yarns, even commercial yarns are usually on the lighter side because they'll get more yardage. So with a lower angle of twist, say like 20, you'll get more yardage than a yarn that's plied at like a 35 degree angle twist.
Okay, so like when you were talking about stiff, that's more like the 45 angle of twist?
The 40s.
40s? Okay.
Yeah. 45 is a really tight.
So why do we go up to 60 on our card?
We don't on the new card.
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, 40s is really dense and tight for something that is going to wear well, right? Before you said something you don't want to wear, and I'm like, of course I want to wear the stuff I'm knitting.
Yeah.
Different type of wear, right? And then 20s, 30s, good for something that has a lot of drape.
Lace weight yarns are usually at about a 20 degree angle of twist, and usually 2-ply. And
10, you're probably just going to fall apart.
Right.
So
it also depends on how many plies you have. Yeah. The more plies you have in a yarn, the lower the angle of twist can be. So for a 3-ply yarn, you probably are going to have a lower angle of twist than a 2-ply yarn.
Now,
same characteristics.
Is that going to change by like 5 or 10 degrees?
I have no idea. I have not done those studies.
We've found the limit of her knowledge. All right. So I did want to show off. This is one of our Angle of Twist cards, as we were just mentioning. About half of it is useless. Uh, no, not useless. If you get to that point, then you know you've gone too far. But we try to make them very pretty, but I don't know if it'll focus there. Yeah. So where in these cards, what you really want to do is pay attention to the. I'm not trying to block you. I'm trying to get to focus. What you really want to pay attention to is that white line in the middle of the graphic element. So Angela, I apologize. We keep getting slowly to respond to what you're saying. A plyback sample will tell me what angle of twist I need to keep it balanced.
Yes.
Yes, and it's important to know what number of plies you're going for, right? So a 2-ply plyback sample will not tell you how to balance for a 3-ply yarn.
Right.
Yeah. And then Angela says for a top sweater is more like
For a top.
A top or sweater is more like 25 to 30.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
If you want something that's going to wear well, because a lower angle twist is going to drape more. Yeah. But it's more subject to stuff like pilling.
Yeah. We got to figure out how to stop that. Other than, higher twist. Anyways, so Summerhill Spinner said she just ordered one of these, so thank you. Thank you. I did want to show off, we have a couple of different versions of these.
Because sometimes getting the right contrast is important.
Sometimes getting the right contrast for your yarn is important, and sometimes it's easier to put your yarn behind than in front. So we've got transparent, translucent-ish ones, colored ones, clear ones. You could tell we had fun with these. But yeah, you can find those on our website. Okay, so Angela is going to do a traditional 3-ply. Just trying to make sure she had the wheels set up and my plan down. And that's exactly what you want to do with this,
what this
right?
is about.
That's the whole point of this. And you are a better person than I, because I would not go through all of this. I would just be like, all right, I'm going to go. And halfway through, I would get depressed and realize I'm doing everything wrong. But
this is a good way when you're doing a project that's going to go over multiple bobbins and take you probably weeks or months to spin.
Yeah.
You don't want to, in the end, be like, oh, well, that bobbin's completely different than that bobbin.
Right.
You want to have some consistency.
So when do you check angle of twist? Because we talked about when you check wraps per inch, but we didn't mention angle of twist checking.
I would check the angle of twist once you have it dialed in. I would also check it when you make major mechanical changes to your wheel.
Or major emotional changes to your life.
Yes.
Have a glass of wine, probably want to check it.
Right. Most people are pretty consistent.
Yeah.
So if your wraps per inch is being consistent, your twist is probably being consistent if you're not, like, performing in front of people.
Next on stage.
Yeah. I also have different fiber content in each of these bats, so that's another new trick.
You're playing on hard mode.
Yeah. But the good thing is, especially when you're doing something like a 3-ply, you don't have to be as precise as your spinning needs to be for a 2-ply. And especially since I'm spinning semi-woolen, a lot of this is going to all even out.
Yeah.
In the final yarn.
Well, yeah, and there's okay, so we've been talking about how, what do you look for?
Can you grab me that bag, the green and blue one?
I don't know if I can. I can if I stand up. So we've been doing a lot of details about how important it is to do these measurements and whatnot. Don't stress out too much about it, because that's actually changed it more than if you just went with it, right? Use it as a guidance to help you learn, to help you become more technical. Your sweater's not going to explode and in flames if you don't do this, but it's hopefully we're giving you some additional tools to help you along a better, more technical route.
Yeah. So I wanted to show another mashup. So this is a mashup I did of different fiber types, carded into bats. And then spun different bats, stripped them. So it's very similar to my current project. And, all of these bats had different fiber content.
I'm gonna continue
Yeah,
stacking. Are we?
stacking.
Do you want to build a yarn man?
And you can kind of tell it's fairly consistent. Once it knits up, it's all gonna work out. If I do ever find like a section that is significantly thinner, I often use that for like
Cuffs.
the ribbing cuffs. If there's a certain part that you're like, I need this gauge to be a little bit tighter, that's when you use your skinnier yarn.
So I'm gonna steal this because we did have a request to measure how do you use the angle of twist. So Summerhill Spinner asked, can you hold up the yarn to the angle of twist card? So maybe we should go a little bit deeper into that because...
And this will be better because this is marled. So it'll be easier to track.
See. Yeah, that's why I said... See? Okay. So maybe I'll go a little bit in detail on this. There is actually two sides to this. There's an S side and there's a Z side. So depending on how you spun your single, you spin the opposite way for plying, right? And that will define whether or not you use the S or the Z side. So then I want to make sure I'm not just grabbing random sections of this and completely ruining your cake. So I'm going to do this on the wrong side on purpose to start off with. So if you look here, what you want to do is line this up along the lines there. And you can see that my yarn is making an X with the backing part.
Instead of being parallel.
And you can, with this particular, because it's transparent, you can put it behind instead. It's a little bit harder to see through the camera because of the glare. Now, if I put it on the correct side, is this the correct side? Yeah. You can see, if the focus gets right, you can see that it's going in the right direction, the same direction. So now you are wanting to look which line matches up with the angle on the yarn itself. Now, one important thing is I don't want to pull this taut. If I pull this, it's going to change that angle. So I just want to make sure, again, I gently lay it on top so that it's straight. And then I can, pinch it at the edge so that I'm not accidentally pulling it some more. All right? Does that make sense? And while we're waiting for a response, and if anybody's got more questions on that, Angela has asked, is woolen or worsted better for a garment? Depends on what you want.
Depends on what you want.
Can I answer this one?
Yeah.
And then you can tell me I'm wrong or right. So with woolen, I like to remember this by basically saying, woolen, wool, warm, etc. Yeah. You're going to be fluffier. It's going to trap more air. It's going to actually be a warmer garment. It's going to be that extra fluff, a little bit extra structure to some degree.
This is woolen spun.
A little bit less stitch definition, but that's what you're going to get with woolen. With worsted, you're going to it's going to be more dense, more tightly together because you're lining up the fibers and smushing out all the air as you're going through the spinning process. So if you want something that is loftier, does woolen tend to pill more too?
Yes.
Okay. So
woolen pills more.
If you want something that's loftier, but you're not so concerned about the pilling, you really want that big, fluffy, warm feeling for a sweater, go woolen. If you want something that wears a little bit better, that you don't have to worry about how fluffy it is.
Or you want really good stitch definition.
Then you go for worsted. And to say that more fluffy or better stitch definition is not to say everything's going to mush together if you do woolen, right, or that you're going to have a brick that you're wearing in terms of really something dense if you go worsted. You're going to have both effects. But it's that tweak in one direction or the other.
Usually most of my sweater yarns are semi-woolen, so they're somewhere in between.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you semi-woolen? Like, how do you spin
semi-woolen? There's a wide variety of how you get semi-woolen. It's any combination of not quite worsted and not quite woolen, because woolen is carded prep, spun long draw, and true worsted is like a inch worming, so your fingers are closer than a staple length together, and with hand comb top. so all your fibers are parallel.
Yeah.
So you can do things like semi-woolen by taking comb top, and if you're spinning it with your hands farther apart than a staple length, that's a semi-woolen draft. It's a woolen style draft using something that is more like a worsted prep. There's a fabulous issue of Ply on semi-woolen, as well as really good issues on worsted and woolen. So
yeah, so I'm going to skip around a little bit on the comments here and say, because Angela has the question related to woolen or worsted, she lives in Texas and does not need warmth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not necessarily going to be the warmth, because if you use a woolen yarn for a lace project, right, it's not going to be warm, right? Or if you're
I found my woolen spun and semi-woolen yarns work really well for temperature regulation.
Yeah, that's
mm-hmm. My worsted style yarns are usually very dense and very good at keeping, because it's just a lot of fiber around you. Yeah. Especially if you are a larger person and a sweater is going to be a good amount of yarn. It is good to know that the weight difference between a woolen spun sweater and a worsted spun sweater can be quite significant.
Yeah, so woolen is going to be much lighter.
It's going to be a lot lighter.
Because of all the air traps,
because
right?
all the air that's trapped in it. And so it's a little bit easier for woolen spun garments to breathe than worsted, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, I mean, again, we're talking about wool here. We're not talking about nylon or anything like that.
Or cotton.
Right? So the synthetics are going to be very, very different in terms of how they allow you to regulate temperature. Wools, they're pretty good at regulating temperature in general, right? You're not going to make something that is just going to overheat you. But yeah,
you might want to go for a thinner yarn.
Yeah. Kathleen has the comment of depends on the fiber used. Also, mohair versus wool, for example.
Yeah. Mohair is very insular. I have a lace mohair sweater that Nick made me, and I wear it on the really cold days.
And it's like you can see through it. You can
see through it. And it is, it can be in the teens, and I'm perfectly warm without a coat just wearing that sweater.
Yeah, and that's my air sweater. If you recall from a previous podcast, that's the one that took me 4 years to knit on a plane. Okay, so then Angela has the question of which is S and Z twist. I think I'm reading this right. Which way do I spin my single, or how do I know if that is clockwise or counterclockwise? Right?
Okay. So S, you follow the turn of the S, and so that is counterclockwise. And Z is the angle of the middle part of the Z, and that's clockwise.
That only works if you draw the letters from the top down.
Yeah.
So unlike my children who tend to draw from the bottom up like a plant growing, I remember my second grade teacher told me, when you're writing letters, they're not plants. They go from the top down. So if you're drawing the S, and it's going to look opposite, so I gotta draw opposite for you guys because you're seeing the opposite, right? If you're drawing the S as you come from the top down, the direction of the angle is counterclockwise. Is related. Well, I was going to say the line that's in the middle of the letter is indicating the direction of the spin of the yarn.
Yes.
But as you're drawing it, just the top part, as you draw the top part, that tells you if it's clockwise or counterclockwise.
So something that's S-plied, counterclockwise plied, is spun Z.
Single spun.
Single spun Z. Yeah. Okay. And vice versa.
All right, let's see. Angela has said her fiber's been prepped on a blending board, and I normally inchworm, but I can do long draw.
You could do long draw if you wanted.
Yeah. So that'll definitely be a woolen, because that's...
Right, carded prep.
Yeah. Yeah, and so blending board, it would be considered carded prep, not hand-carded. Even though you're doing it...
It's not hand-combed.
Hand-combed, sorry, yes. Hand-combed is specifically with combs, right?
Yes.
The Wolverine cloth things.
Yes.
Yeah. We need to get some sort of meme about Wolverine doing Things of his actual claws. Anyways, yeah. So you would be completely woolen in the full woolen form if you're doing laundry for that. Kathleen adds the comment of, if you really want to be toasty, alpaca cross Angora blend.
Yes.
That
yak, camel, Kiviot.
I'm going to put my warning, though, by the way. Alpaca grows, and my first sweater that I knit
was 100% alpaca.
Was 100% alpaca. I didn't spin it, but I bought the yarn. And it grew to the point where it was like around my knees.
Yeah.
So be careful, especially when doing anything alpaca or heavily alpaca.
Yeah. The drape.
Yeah. Okay. And the drape is crazy.
Is there a correct direction for the single to be spun?
So Angela's asking that. Correct.
I don't like that word.
Well, that's like which is correct, right or left-handed?
So there are people who argue that spinning your singles counterclockwise and applying them Z can be better for crochet and for some types of knitters, because depending on whether or not you pull your yarn from the center of your cake or the outside of your cake and how you wrap your yarn, it can take twist out of a typical S-plied yarn.
And there's also something to it that I think Kathleen is also mentioning in terms of the picker or thrower.
Yes.
That also, so now we're really getting into the weeds, right? Like this is thinking about the amount of twist that is added or subtracted when it comes off your ball, and then from when you're knitting. This is to me, I feel like this is almost an academic exercise because it's not going to make a huge difference in the final project.
It can.
Okay. How?
Jillian Moreno has swatched.
Yeah.
So it can cause some biasing. It can also cause your plies to open up and be more likely to forget what the term is. That you split your yarn.
Yeah. Okay.
For continental knitters, especially if you pull from the center of your cake, you can change the amount of twist in the yarn so much, and you do a difference between knitting and purling that gives the continental knitters have kind of their stockinette does not look like a thrower.
No, so I will
You
say,
can remedy that by pulling from the outside of your cake.
Yeah, I will say, since you told me that, I have been with the 12-day spin along knitting. I've been going, since I do continental, I've been going from the outside of the ball, and I have seen a difference with my stockinette that it looks a lot more even.
Yeah.
That my purling doesn't look wonky.
For crochet and continental, you can either flip how your yarn is spun, and then it doesn't matter if you take it from the middle, because you're going to be adjusting it. But or you can just knit from the outside of your cake. Okay,
so we're getting deep in the weeds with people here. So let's see. Angela is saying she's spin is it and plies in the other direction, but if I've spun it on the wheel and a spindle, tend to vary which directions those are. Yeah, that does happen. So let's see. Angela says that she is a continental knitter and pulled from the center of the cake. Is there better single direction for that? So if I understood correctly from what you were saying, if you ply Z,
spin counterclockwise.
Spin S, ply Z.
Yes.
Spin counterclockwise, ply Z. Then that will be better for a continental pulling from the center of the cake. Okay. Elizabeth says the way she knits takes twist out of an S-ply yarn.
Yes.
So you overply your yarns. Okay.
Yeah. That's another solution.
That's another solution, absolutely. And this is the great part about making your own yarn. You can tweak it to your own specifications for knitting. So that's a perfect solution. You can also try plying the opposite direction, and which requires you to spin the opposite direction, and see how that has an impact. It's a great experiment that you can do at home. So I think we caught up with all the comments. Oh, and there's a new one. Kathleen is a thrower and usually goes from the outside of the ball, spin singles Z, ply S.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and it's the exact opposite of wow, it's like exactly the opposite, right?
Throwing doesn't change the twist of the yarn as much as continental.
Yeah. I have nothing else to say.
Yeah. Julia Moreno has been posting a lot of good things about this on the Mason Dixon knitting blog. If you want to see swatches.
Good. Well, we are just up at an hour. Is there anything else that you wanted to address here?
No, that's the basics of it.
Okay.
Is basically by tracking tracking the metrics of your yarn throughout your spin will cause you to spin a more consistent yarn because it gives you feedback. Okay. It gives you instant feedback instead of having to wait till you've spun 1.5 pounds of yarn and plied it and washed it and then finally figure out, oh, these skeins aren't the same.
Yeah. So, okay. To review,
check your wraps per inch.
Check your wraps per inch. Check your angle of twist.
Twist on a plyback sample.
Anytime you are just sitting down. Anytime something significantly changes with your wheel, changing your tension, changing bobbin, changing whatever. Anytime you're into your second or third glass of wine. Yeah. Anytime your kid gives you stressful news. Anytime something.
When
something
you're
changes.
worried that you might not be spinning consistently.
Yeah. And then Kathleen brings the comment again of best thing to do is sample. Yeah. Checking with the plyback samples. You don't have to break it off. Having where'd the card go? The card here. Having the card is actually really useful because even if you go and you make a measurement with the angle of twist or with the
most people are, unless you're doing very precise spinning, most people are going to be able to look at a sample card and say, oh, I'm not spinning like that anymore. I need to make it thinner. I need to make it thicker.
Yeah. Well, and that's an excellent point, right? So this is all you need. You don't need to buy this extra cool, pretty toys.
This makes it faster and easier to check.
But even if you have that, this is still useful to make because you can put it up against your angle, your wraps per inch gauge. You can measure a number, and then
you can file it for future use.
Well,
like your final yarn.
What I was going to say is you can look at it again and be like, well, was it really an 8? Maybe it was a 9. And then you can go back and check with your original sample, right? So writing down the number is great. Having that tool there is great, but this is really the record of what you have spun originally.
And making a sample card is not going to make you or break you on yarn.
Yeah. If you're that good at yarn chicken, then you have some skills which are better put used to somewhere else. All right. Any other questions before we break for the night? The next when is the next podcast going to be?
The next one, since you guys are getting a chance to now start spinning, is we're gonna Monday, which means I need to finish 3 bobbins by then so I can fly for you guys. Okay. So the next one will be Monday, and we're going to be talking about, or no, is it Monday or is it next Wednesday? It might be giving us an entire week.
I don't have my phone with me. What am I looking up?
HipStrings.com. Look up Great Mashup. Mashup is one word. Okay.
Yeah, you say things.
We'll double check the date. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about the next time because now you guys can really start spinning. And then after that one, there will be one more live stream that is about picking a pattern. So Nick's going to... Or no. Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one is plying and finishing.
April 15th.
April 15th.
So you have a week.
You have an entire week to spend, guys. And so do I. And then the following Monday after that, April 20th, we'll be talking about characterizing your yarn. And then Wednesday, April 22nd, we'll be talking about picking a pattern.
Yeah. So Angela has the question of, if we have further questions, where can we ask them?
You can ask them in the comments on YouTube, and we'll get back to you. You can also ask on Ravelry, in my Ravelry group. There, we have a thread for the Great Mashup Spin Along. You can also message me through Facebook,
Instagram,
HipStrings, and Instagram.
And you can message me as Mr. HipStrings on Instagram. And I will probably ask Jill if you end up messaging me. But I do know some things, as I've vaguely proven today. Let's see. Ikinspa says, I can't wait to get started on the wheels. The wheel's been empty since Saturday, waiting for info. Thank you. You're very welcome. And Hollis says, winding from bobbin onto weaving bobbins, ply from varied weaving bobbins helps out, even out the diameter. Yep, absolutely.
But not necessary if you're tracking.
It helps even out some of the
Twist.
spin and twist, not so much the diameter, right?
Not diameter.
And I've done some ridiculous things where when I'm going onto another bobbin, I will go 10 feet across. So
you can also put your lacy Kate at the other side of the house.
Yeah, and so that definitely evens out the twist, but it's not going to change what you've made in terms of a draft. So if you have over twist in some regions, and that's why it's thinner, then yes, it'll even that out. But if you have more fiber there, it will not even that out. All right. And yes, Angela, you are more than welcome to ask questions. Everybody's more than welcome to ask questions. As you can tell, we like talking about this stuff. So by all means, please contact us, and I hope you have lots of fun playing around with your yarn finally.
And please share what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have a specific group on Ravelry to talk about this spin along?
It's in the HipStrings group on Ravelry. There is a thread for the Great Mashup Spin Along. It's sticky to the top of the group. And then for Instagram, there is a hashtag. It is the Great Mashup SAL.
Excellent. All right, so great. We hope to see those pictures and everything, and we will get on putting in the comments here the proper equations in the next
for making
couple
estimates.
of minutes for making estimates. Right. Sample. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great
night.